to be honest, Paris was a little asshole for a good 4 or 5 years after the murder, maybe even longer. He didn't really start to mellow out in his treatment towards me till he was about, I don't know, I guess 19. And what it took was me reaching the point finally where I was like, you know what? I was like, you're not a child anymore, when he was about 18. And I was like, and until you know, I was like, you can even fake it, you know, like until you, like I established some much clearer boundaries because he was not a child anymore, and he kind of kept stepping over those boundaries. And so I just didn't talk to him for a year.
Okay.
And after that, I think he was like, he got a deeper appreciation of, oh, like, this is what having my mom does for me. Because again, he's a narcissist. So it all comes back to, you know, what it does for him. But after that, he started to kind of mellow out. But when he first was arrested, he was cruel. It was like all of a sudden, he was like a completely different person. I mean, people have a hard time believing me, I think, sometimes, but Paris was a great kid. I mean, he was loving and affectionate with me. He was very helpful with his sister. I mean, we had arguments and things like that. He was still my child. And then things were rough, and he was angry, definitely, during the time that I relapsed. But there was nothing major that, you know, somebody could look at and be like, oh, like, that's what happened. But afterwards, it was like he was a completely different person. In fact, he told me one time, I guess it was 4 or 5 months after the murder, and I mean, I was a wreck. Like, I was a wreck. I was severely traumatized and trying still to navigate the, you know, criminal justice system that I really knew nothing about at the time, and you know, figure out like what happened to my son so I can get him help. Like, how do I fix him, you know? And grieving Ella, you know, it was like there was 2 parts of my brain, one part that had to figure out who Paris is and how to deal with him and how to help him. And then this other side of me that was just completely overwhelmed with grief. But I was also grieving Paris too, even though he was still here, because I was grieving the child that I had. This one, I didn't even know who it was. There was a time about 4 or 5 months after the murder where I went to go see him, and I can't remember what had happened. Something had happened that day. I found out something or other. I was always finding out new stuff. And I couldn't stop crying. I mean, I couldn't stop crying. And, you know, I think I asked him something like, you know, Paris, just, you know, just what the hell? Like, how did this happen? Like, you've got to give me something, because I'm like, I need something to hold on to. And he just kind of looked at me, and no empathy or compassion or pain on his face for the fact that like his mother was literally crying on the table. And he just he had this grin on his face, and he was like, he goes, y'all are just also fucking stupid. And I was like, what? And he was like, y'all have all just been so fucking stupid. And he was like, all this time, you thought I was intelligent and handsome and charming and artistic and creative and helpful. He was like, you're all so fucking stupid. He was like, none of you saw the real me. Mm-hmm. And I remember just looking at him and being like, no. Like, the way that I see it is you're the stupid one now, because you are all of those things, but you chose to throw all of that away. Mm-hmm. Right? And become whatever this is. So he was quite cruel for quite a while, and he only got worse as time went on.
Did he ever apologize for what he did?
Oh, not really. I mean, when he was younger, every now and then he would be like, Mom, I'm sorry. Like, like he had eaten the last of the potato chips and left the bag in the closet or something. But he is not capable of a sincere apology because he's not sorry. And I mean, we have very blunt conversations now about the fact that he just doesn't feel empathy. He told me the other day, we were talking about, who he is. And he was like, Mom, he was like, I know that when I think about what I did to Ella, I'm supposed to like open this drawer somewhere inside of me, and there's empathy and guilt. And he was like, but when I open that drawer, it's just empty. It's just not there. Mm-hmm. I'm like, yeah, I know. I mean, I've come to accept that about him.
I mean, I'm sure you've asked yourself the questions a million times, but was there anything ever that in hindsight could have foreshadowed what would happen?
Okay, so this is what I tell people all the time. There are little things that happened, but even if you add them all together, you still wouldn't come to the conclusion that this is who he is now. And at the time that they happened, it's very... at the time they happen, it's not one of those things that would make you go, oh, warning, warning, warning. Mm-hmm. Like some of it can be explained away by, oh, well, that's what kids do. Or when he got a little bit older, oh, well, he's a teenager now and he's trying to figure out who he is. And so the two that I'm thinking of are when he was little, maybe 3 or 4 years old. My mother had a farm in North Carolina up in the mountains, and the house had it was kind of built into the side of a mountain, and so the porch of the house was really high off the ground, probably a good 25 or 30 feet. Mm-hmm. And it was raining really hard one day, and whenever it would rain really hard there in a particular time of the year, frogs would just come out from everywhere. Mm-hmm. Frogs. It looked like the plague or and I walked outside on the porch, and Paris had a bucket. Mm-hmm. Paris had a bucket full of frogs. And he was 3-4 years old. He was taking the frogs one by one and throwing them over the rail to the concrete driveway below. And, the frogs were dying. And I was like, Paris, whoa, what are you doing? And he was like, well, I just like the sound that they make when they hit the bottom. And I'm like, okay, no, honey. Like, we need to talk about this. Like, those are frogs. They can feel hurts and it's killing them. And he was like, oh, okay. And, was it cruel? Yes. Have I seen other children do cruel things to animals when they're that age? Yes.
Yeah, I just want to say that's something that probably a lot of kids do because they just don't know better. I mean, it's not that like he was intentionally torturing them with sticks and poking their eyes out to make them suffer. Just like something like they made a nice sound, like kids throw eggs over all around the kitchen because it sounds nice like that.
Yeah, I mean, it's just one of those moments that you have. I mean, I remember doing things when I was 3 or 4 years old, like, pouring salt on a slug to see, what happens to it. Now as an adult, I'm like, oh my gosh, that's horrible. That had to hurt so bad. But when you're young, you don't know. And, whatever misgivings I had or whatever, emotional reaction that engendered in me at the moment was put to rest because there were a couple of frogs that had not died instantly. And then I had to tell my son, Paris, this is one of the reasons why, we shouldn't be doing this because look, like this one is still alive and it's in pain and it's hurting. And now we have to put it out of its misery. We can't let it continue to live in pain like this. Mm-hmm. And Paris was like, I can't do that, Mama. Mm-hmm. Like, I mean, he could not. And so I had to, put the frog out of its misery. And then when he was older, there was an incident where I discovered that he had been wearing some of my undergarments. Now, in our household, it has always been like we have no problem with people who are gay or lesbian or transgender or transvestite. It's like, people, as my 5-year-old Phoenix says, I do me and you do you. That's kind of our mentality, So I didn't have a problem with the fact that he had been experimenting. I had often wondered when he was growing up if Paris might be gay or bisexual. And so when I discovered my undergarments in his room, we just sat down and we had a talk about it. Why are these in here? And do you have questions? Because he was 13. Like, do you have questions? And, is there anything that you want to ask me? Or, and we decided together because he told me that the reason he had them is because he wondered what it was like to be female. Mm-hmm. And more specifically, he wondered what it was like to be me. Well, I didn't really have a good answer to that because it wasn't an issue that I had never dealt with. I've always been fine with being a girl. I feel like one inside and out. So we agreed together to have him go talk to a counselor. And I made sure he knew that it wasn't because I thought there was anything wrong with what he was doing. It was just that I felt like, it was something that because I didn't know much about it and that because he was a 13-year-old boy, he might feel more comfortable working through it with somebody who, understood it better. Because, I mean, I don't care how close you are to your child. I'm sure it's hard for a 13-year-old boy to be talking to his mother about any kind of sex. Yeah. So he agreed that, he would like to have somebody else besides me to talk to it, with the door open all the time that he could still talk to me. But he murdered Ellen the day before his appointment. So.
Okay.
And now we know that there are some sexual and sexuality issues that are part of Paris's current mindset. I mean, we know that now. Didn't know it at the time.
Okay. I think I lost you there.
After he killed his sister.
Yeah, now you're back. Now you're back. Yeah. So the day before it happened, was there anything unusual? Was there anything that you say change in behavior or?
Yeah, the weekend that it all happened, he was being very difficult to deal with. He was, I had to work most of that weekend. And he snuck out of the house one night to go down to the local skateboard park. And he, I didn't know about it. The babysitter didn't tell me. This was the night before he, and the next day when Ella told me that, Paris had gotten in trouble for sneaking out. And then that day that he actually killed her, he was very angry with me because, he had been, there was consequences for his behavior. And he also was angry because Paris was given an allowance at the beginning of every month. Just, he, and the reasoning behind giving it to him all up front at the beginning of the month was so he could also learn how to budget and manage money. Well, he had gone to the mall that weekend with the babysitter and Ella, and he had spent all of his money at one time. And he was mad at me because I had told him, no, that's not the point of getting an allowance like this. You have to make it last all month long. And so what I had told him was, you need to pick one or two things that you would like to keep now, and the rest we're taking back. So you can get your money back. And, learn how to budget yourself. Well, he was really angry about that. And I remember, when I left home that day to go to work, he would barely talk to me. And I also remember that the very last thing I said to my son when I left was I gave him a big hug, which he did not return, and a kiss, which he did not return. And I remember telling him, Paris, I love you, and we've gone through hard times before, and we've gotten through them, and so we're going to get through this too. And then that was, the last I saw him before I saw him at the police station the next day.
But none of this sounds unusual. 13 years old playing with their sexuality in one way or the other, or being mad for being grounded or whatever. It's what 13-year-olds worries. That's nothing unusual. So there was really nothing. And it seems so strange that it's almost like you're talking about two different kinds of persons. So like the person before, the person after, like those would be two completely different people. And I've seen your documentary, and there are snippets in there where Paris playing with the daughter and seemed like a perfectly normal child, not like a grumpy recluse or something. So it's really yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, but Paris is a very smart child and now grown man. And I mean, you have to remember that in like those home movies you saw where he's playing with Ella, he was already having homicidal thoughts, you know. At the age of 8 or 9, he fantasized about decapitating me because he had gone on PlayStation restriction. And so he had, you know, worked out this fantasy where he was just going to decapitate me while I slept. And then he and Ella would get to do whatever they wanted all weekend. And then he was just going to call his grandmother when it was time to go to school. And, you know, evidently I'm going to be in the bed decapitated this whole time. So he was already thinking homicidal thoughts. But kids aren't dumb. People are always like, oh, well, you know, how kids are so innocent. And kids are smart. Kids know that you don't go around, you know, saying to adults, hey, I'm thinking about decapitating you, you know, because then the adults are going to be like, oh, whoa, okay. Like, well, hopefully the adults are going to be like, oh, we need to, you know, address this issue. So, I mean, for people, you know, that have a hard time believing, like, well, if he was thinking that, he would have been acting this way. Well, no. Some do act out, but not all of them.
Yeah. Okay. I think I lost you there for a second. So, I mean, there's nothing that seems like, unusual when you hear about it. So, when all of this happens, I mean, how did you cope? How did you cope, and how did you heal? I mean, the first moments must have been like a bad dream that never happens. But how did you cope over time and heal over time? What was the process?
Well, in my own way, I became a lot like Paris in the fact that it was like I was living for different people. On the one hand, I'm trying to think what's like the best way to describe it, because even to me, I still have moments where I'm like, how did I do all that? On the one hand, you know, I was falling apart. I lost 35 pounds in 2 weeks. I was so traumatized, you know, that I think I was in shock for like actual shock for quite a while. I couldn't speak without stuttering. I mean, I cried non-stop. It felt like for a year and a half. I used to go to the grocery store just, you know, and, you know, just tears running down my face because everything I would see would trigger it. You know, kids with their parents, kids arguing with their parents, kids anywhere, just, you know, triggered everything. I was, especially after Paris was sentenced and, you know, was sent away, you know, I was self-medicating with drinking and, you know, the doctors kept me supplied with plenty of Xanax and sleeping pills. But at the same time, I was doing everything I could to still be a parent and mother my child and dealing with lawyers. I mean, I was being investigated also by the, you know, child welfare authorities and the police. And I mean, I hadn't committed any crime, but I was being investigated. And so I had all of that. But I think really what it comes down to, you know, I have a book coming out soon, hopefully soon, And I've been, working on it. And, it has to do with those early days after Ella died and, kind of what led up to the creation of the foundation. And the theme that I'm noticing as I'm going back and looking at my own writings and stuff from the time is the way that I dealt with it was I didn't try to stop myself from feeling any of it. Like I really had a choice. But, instead of running away from it, I dove into it. Mm-hmm. Like if I'm going to be angry, who cares what everybody thinks? I have a right to be angry. Or if I need to cry all day long, cry all day long. Who cares what people think when you're at the grocery store crying on their apples, Like dive into it. But when it comes time to make decisions at the end of the day, or when it's, decision time, make all of those decisions and base all of your actions on the fact, base it on the love you feel, not the anger, not the rage. And I think that's what kept me going, staying focused on the fact that I loved my children. Because I also, a lot of people are like, well, you don't speak for Ella, or where is Ella's voice? And I don't think those people understand that the way that I speak for Ella and the way that I've always spoken for Ella is to not become like Paris, to focus on the love. Because I made a promise to Ella the night that she died, when I'm real big about keeping promises to my kids. I think that's why I make them, because I know once I say I promise, I'm going to do everything I can to actually keep that promise. But I promised her that I would make her, I promised her I wasn't going to let her die for nothing. Mm-hmm. That I would make something meaningful come out of this. And I think that people who say that I shouldn't still love Paris, or I shouldn't have forgiven him, or I don't speak for Ella, I don't think they understand that the way that I've handled all of this has been for Ella and because of Ella. Because if Ella had grown up the kind of person I would have wanted her to be, somebody who's loving and compassionate and forgiving and tries to help people. I mean, so I stayed focused on that. I guess through a lot of it, I've had my promises to keep me going. I've had promises that I've had to keep. Mm-hmm. So even when I didn't want to, you go back to your promise.
Here comes the sunshine.